Here I are a little bit early Wednesday morning, want to talk about teaming. So one of the things to number one understand when it comes to teaming is that a lot of times you can't pick ultimately who's on your team. Now I'll give you from a familial perspective, you can't choose your parents, but you can choose the person that you want to spend the most amount of time with, whether it's a spouse, significant other, a partner, however you want to classify that individual. But when it comes to children and their personalities, yeah, sometimes they're a little bit like you, but other times they kind of come a little bit predetermined. There's a little bit of the debate between nature and nurture, right? So is it your genetics, is it your genes, or is it how you're raising everybody? So a lot of times the children that you have, they come a little bit programmed on what they want to do and where they want to go and their different attributes. And so think of that then from the workplace. You might be an entrepreneur, and you might hire people, you're interviewing everybody, but ultimately it might get to a scale all of a sudden where you've now given that control to somebody else, a recruiting department, a staffing firm. And so all of a sudden now you have a team that wasn't completely 100% built by you, and now here's where you are. Or you're an employee, and so this is kind of the context of that. So the first thing to get in your mind, first principle, is that you don't ultimately choose your team. The team is created, and now you got to figure out how to make best use of each other's talents and also everybody's weaknesses. And so great book, From Good to Great. Jim Collins talks about how you want to have the right people on the bus, right? So the bus being your business, right people on it. And then number two is you want to make sure you have the right people in the right seats. And so that becomes the next part of the equation. And so what I wanted to do was to give some thoughts if you're entrepreneurial, right? And you start out your own business, the first person that you hire needs to be able to help you not be stuck doing some of the administrative or what I like to call $10 an hour stuff. There's nothing wrong with $10 an hour stuff, but if you're an entrepreneur, you need to get to the next level in order to really grow the business. And so what it comes down to is having a look at what ultimately is your strengths, looking at your own capabilities. So you have to know yourself pretty well. Are you more on the analytical side? Are you more on the sales side? So that way you need someone that's analytical. If you're more on the analytical side, that means you might need somebody that's more on the sales side, more on that creative. And then one of the things that you want to have a look at is what's ultimately are you trying to get out of hiring staff? So once you have a staff person working for you, what tasks and duties do you want them to do? Now it's a lot easier to have the approach of I'm going to take a little bit longer to hire someone versus hire quickly and then fire late, right? So it's hire slowly, fire quickly. And so what I like to put there is the first 90 days is really a trial period for both, right? So you're gonna set some different parameters, some different expectations, maybe even a job description, and this is what you're looking for. This is what you want to get accomplished. And then you start putting like practice, from interview and the whole onboarding process to now they're here. And so looking at how are he or she, how are they doing at their job and their responsibilities. And I like to have, hey, first week, let's check in. Was there anything that I told you that I would give you that you don't have? Number two is, in our conversation, is there anything that you need from me to help you be successful? And number three is, how are you feeling about everything? And that way I can check in. So then after the first week, check in again the second week, check in again in a month. So let's say they get hired January 1, just because from a simplicity perspective. Then I follow up with them on January 8th, follow up with them on January 15th, similar questions. Is there anything that we talked about in the interview process that I haven't delivered on? Number two, what do you need from me? And three, how are you feeling about things are here? And then, so January 1st, then I want to check in January 1st, then the 8th, then February 1st, then March 1st, and then at the end of March. So March 31st or April 1, that's 90 days. What do you think? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to build here? What more do you want? Now remember, people are motivated by their own ideas. It might be income, it might be progression, it might be intellectual stimulation. They might enjoy the build. And so I see a lot of times this quote being thrown around, especially by entrepreneurs, where they're saying, well, if you're not going to build your own dream, then you're going to build somebody else's. There's nothing wrong with working on a big major project to help it come to fruition. So then the moment that you can identify what's really motivating them, you then want to look ultimately, if you're entrepreneurial, what are the tasks that drive the ultimate success, right? So what's hitting the revenue line? And number two is when it comes to looking at expenses, is there any way to minimize those expenses, especially when you're first starting out? So a lot of times it's going to come down to the controllables of what you can do. When you're entrepreneurial, when you first start out, man, it's those face-to-face meetings, it's those face-to-face conversations, it's those invites, 10 people that you're inviting every single day to be able to buy the products and services that you have. Next is to be able to have a look at, as you create this team, what can it kind of look like, right? You have these different circles of, ultimately this is what I want the team to eventually grow to, these different kind of specialists, these different kind of roles. But when you first start out, hey, this is how it is. And then you want to be able to identify a process. So when you first hire somebody, they might not know anything about your process. So you want to break it down to them from the moment that you get a name or a contact, you have a conversation with them and you move them through, and then what's that follow-up, what's that look like, so that way they know where they can put themselves in. And then in each part of that process, from a customer service perspective, from a sales perspective, from a business development perspective, you want to assign yourself and that new employee to those different roles. And so sometimes it might be the two of you, especially if you start part-time. Next is to have a look at marketing and sales. So there's gonna be some things that are short-term, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna go to this networking event and hopefully I meet people. Number two is I might have some social media. So we're putting out some content. We're using LinkedIn. We're using Hearsay Social, things along those lines. Hootsuite, Social Jukebox, things that help us posting a little bit easier. But then what can you be doing to be able to harvest all those connections? Remember, it's not about the content, it's about the engagement. It's not about the quantity of followers or likes. It's about the quality of your engagement and their engagement. Right? Are they making comments? Are you responding back? Or are you getting involved in what they're posting? And next is to have a look at what can you be doing to be able to focus in on a niche. So identify, are there particular companies, are particular individuals, who ultimately do you want to service? And then, for some people, they're like, okay, let's go after the big ones, the Fortune 500. Let's go after the medium-sized ones. That's, over 100 employees. Let's go after the small ones, under 50 employees. And then, so it's understanding that. Next is when it comes to a customer service, client engagement, what does that service model look like from an ideal perspective? So if let's say you close somebody and you got them on retainer January 1st, when's the next time you follow up with that person? And in the follow-up, is there certain things that you want to be able to do? What's another way that you can be able to make sure that you can provide more value to them? What's that process look like? Is it email? Is it daily? Is it email? Is it quarterly newsletters? Is it a blog? Is it a vlog? Is it a YouTube channel? Whatever it is that you want to do to reach out to those individuals and keep them in process. Texting is another great way to be able to keep in front of people, just because if you keep the text short, it's pretty easy for most people to read. And then from a niche perspective, is it more focused in on, is there something that you as an entrepreneur need to learn in order to get in order to level up, or is it staff? Do they need to get leveled up in order to offer greater services and value? And so you want to look at that, especially after the 90 days, you want to be able to create a career path for this individual, even though they're not going to take over your job, right? If you're the entrepreneur, you're the business owner, you're the CEO and president, they're not going to take over your job after 90 days. But you want to give them an opportunity to see where we're going to build this and where it's going to go, lay down to them the vision, and make sure that they know it well enough that they can rehearse it back to you. When it comes to LinkedIn harvesting, I want to talk about this for a little bit. It's sending out direct messages to individuals, like whatever connections you have. Let's say it's 300. I would send a DM to every single one of those people right now today and say, hey, do you know somebody that needs these services? Do you know somebody? Do you know somebody? Do you know somebody? And that way, you can at least send out 300 emails today, and then have a follow-up then in 1 week to do the exact same thing. And then after that, follow up in maybe 2 weeks after that. So January 1st, and then the 8th, and then the 22nd. And if they don't respond back, sorry, time to move on, we're disconnected. Because if you're not willing to go to bat for me, if you're not willing to correspond with me in LinkedIn, there's no value to you in my connections, right? I want my network I want to be working for you, and I want you to be working for me, right? From that standpoint of, it's who do you know? What value can I bring to the table? At the same time, what value do you bring me? And that's the value of a network. So I call that LinkedIn harvesting. There we go. Let's stop it there. Sherms out.